Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye podcast. I'm your guest host, Laura Munson. The Woman's Eye has been a wonderful support of my work, from my memoir, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, to my novel, Willis Grove, to my acclaimed Haven writing retreats in Montana. I love that they included me in their wonderful anthology, 20 Women Storytellers. And I'm thrilled that they've asked me to be a guest host on their wonderful All Things Women podcast. I love their mission, how they celebrate fascinating women who are taking charge, making a difference, and helping them create the life they really want. My guest today, Brooke Siem, is doing that and a whole lot more. Before I introduce you to her, I'd like you to hear a little bit more about Brooke. This is her bio. Brooke is a speaker, the author of her memoir, May Cause Side Effects, and Food Network Chopped champion, and she's cooked for me in this house. I can tell you she's one exquisite chef, human, and of course, writer. Brooke Siem was among the first generation of teens to be medicated with antidepressants. After spending half her life and her entire adult life on antidepressants, she wondered, who might I be without them? 6 years after taking her last antidepressant and now fully healed from what was once assumed to be lifelong depression, Brooke's mission is to share the story of what happened after she booked a one-way ticket to Malaysia and got off all the psychiatric drugs. Unfurled against a global backdrop and her work as an award-winning chef, Brooke's story chronicles explosive and terrifying antidepressant withdrawal and the fight to manage the modern mental health system, all while demanding hope and forgiveness in the name of healing. I love her mission. I also want to add that Brooke is an alum of my Haven writing retreats in Montana, and it's been such a true honor to be at her table, helping that book come alive and getting it out into the world. And what a full circle moment for this writing teacher to sign my books at the same event not long ago as Brooke at the opening of Zibby's bookshop in Santa Monica. I'm so happy to share her brilliance today on the Woman's Eye podcast. So welcome, Brooke Siem. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be doing it with you, because I always say that this book would not have been possible without you. And I really believe that, because it was like just being able to kind of unlock things in Haven was it was the difference maker for me. And so just to be able to keep talking to you about it and to do events with you, it just, I get all fuzzy. It's great.
You took that stand for yourself. You know, I talk to a lot of people who it's a perfect match for, who just don't have the courage to do it. And you did it. And, it's not about me. It's about the program and about the people who come, and you took full advantage of it, and you learned and you grew and you became, and now your book is helping people. So I couldn't be more pleased. So I want to spell some of this out for people out there first. So what is antidepressant withdrawal, and why do people need to know about it?
Yeah, so my book is called May Cause Side Effects, and it's a memoir about antidepressant withdrawal. It's the first book on antidepressant withdrawal to be marketed towards the regular consumer market, which is really important because it just shows that there's a shift in our narrative and understanding about the long-term effects, the side effects of these drugs. You know, we're at a point now where 1 in 6 people in the US are on some form of psychiatric drug, and many of them have been on them for a very long period of time. I was on it for 15 years and never really had any conversation about what it would be like to get off of these drugs. And I thought it would be as easy to get on them as it was, or to get off them as it was to get on them. But that really wasn't the case. And so, we all understand the concept of withdrawal when it comes to, nicotine withdrawal, or even sometimes people talk about sugar withdrawal or alcohol withdrawal, right? It's the body's process of recovering homeostasis, getting back to normal. The problem is that with long-term use of psychiatric drugs and antidepressants, which are so common, we've really conditioned our mind and body for a long time to rely on these substances. And if we pull them away too quickly, the body just goes completely nuts, and it can create a lot of very distressing symptoms that, if you don't know what they are, can be thought of as a relapse. Some people think they have a new mental illness. It's the most horrific thing I've ever been through. And so when I wrote this book, when I started writing it, there was almost no literature, almost no research. This was 2016, 2017. That has changed a little bit, but it is still shocking to me how little understanding there is of withdrawal and how to pull patients off drugs safely amongst the medical community and prescribers. So this book is an effort to help humanize the experience, to help patients feel less alone, to help prescribers recognize what withdrawal is, and to hopefully ultimately change the methodology in which we pull people off of these drugs.
Thank you so much for doing your homework, both in life and being able to share all those stats with us. Now, those are important. I want to move into what the catalyst was for writing this book, because a lot of people who write memoirs don't have the place of service that you have. They have the talking points, which are important, but you're that rare writer that has the courage to go into your story. And there are parts of your book I will never, ever forget. She plays with words and cadence. She, whether we like it or not, brings us right into the conflict of what was going on in her mind, in her body, in her soul, all of it. She takes full responsibility for it. There's not even a stitch of poor me in that book, if you ask me. And I want you to talk about not only the catalyst for writing the book, but also for those out there who might have a memoir in them, who want to help others through sharing their stories, how to find the courage to actually act on that catalyst. Talk to us about that.
Well, the very interesting thing about the catalyst for my book is that it started right when I was starting to recover. So one of the curious things about depression and depression recovery is that in order to truly recover, I believe you really have to make some radical choices and some radical changes in your life in order to help remove some of the stimuluses that were, helping to contribute to the problem to begin with. So once you start to do that and you really commit, I mean, in my case, I had a business in New York that I left. I left my apartment. I even left my dog, which sounds terrible, but it was the only way that I could basically save myself, and she was in the best hands possible. So it worked out better for her in the end, honestly. But when you completely start from zero, you really are forced to get to know who you are and to totally start over. And after 15 years of depression and antidepressants, I had been very conditioned to say no. It was no to everything. So I said, I need to do something radically different. And I started on this kind of small little quest where I said yes to any yes or no question, as simple as, do you want cream and sugar in your coffee? I don't take sugar in my coffee, but if someone asked me, I said yes. I was just kind of quietly blogging about it. And during this period of saying yes, I was asked by someone if I would write a book about my experience. And I said yes. And I didn't have anything else to do at the time. I mean, I didn't have a job at that point. I had no idea where I was going to live. So I was just in this place of absolutely pure opportunity and creation. And so I started writing. And what it allowed me to do was I started to work through what had happened to me in the prior year. And there were still some things I was very afraid to say out loud, very afraid to make public for, the usual fears of retribution, or even in my case, like of ironically being called crazy. And so I found that when I started writing it down and really putting life to the feelings, the intensity of all that shame and fear really started to dissipate. And there's still times when I'm a little nervous to actually talk about what happened to me, but by putting it in the book and knowing there are so many people who responded well and supportive publisher and all those good things, it really helped to make me realize, oh, this was something that happened to me. It's not a fault of myself. And that by writing it, I gave it life, and I effectively gave it away. I gave it back out into the universe to do good. And that to me is one of the greatest things that memoir and writing can do.
Absolutely. And I love the point you just made. And for anyone out there who wants to write a memoir, whether you're a writer or not, who wants to tell your story or a personal essay, but wants to write past the fear of exposure, but is terrified to do so. What Brooke just said is something that I try to teach, which is we can turn a phrase or twist a plot or have a fabulous command of the language in which we're writing all day long. But if we haven't used the writing to build the bridge to ourselves, it will never build the bridge to the reader. Yeah. And that's the work that needs to happen. And sometimes art imitates life and life imitates art. Sometimes we have to write our way through something or in hindsight to process it for ourselves. And, you know, I always say writing is my practice, my prayer, my meditation, my way of life, and sometimes my way to life. Did you do any writing during that time in your life, or was it just holding on for dear life?
I had a lot of documenting. So I was traveling internationally for a good chunk of my withdrawal period, and I committed to journaling about 500 words a day. It's funny though, if I go back and read it, it's mostly just me complaining about feeling fat from eating too much on the trip. I mean, it's really not all that productive, but every once in a while there's a little something, a nugget that I was able to pull out and say, oh, right, I remember that happened. So then I could connect it to the feeling, plus, you know, all the emails and the photos and Instagram at the time. So I felt like I had a big wealth to draw on to make sure everything was factually and emotionally accurate. But I wasn't writing about it in the sense of like consciously knowing I was going to use it in the future. It was more of a coping tool at the time, which it was why it was mostly just me complaining a lot.
I think that's what it has to be. I mean, there's no recipe, but it has to be a tool that we use for ourselves, especially if we're writing from a place of service. It's got to start with service of self. When we're talking about memoir, the number one thing that memoir writers hear from readers is, thank you for helping me know I'm not alone. So if you're out there and you have a memoir in you, and you're hearing all the things that we all hear, whether we're best-selling authors or not, the refusals are the same. I've heard them over and over again, especially from women. Who do I think I am? Somebody else already did it better than I ever could. I don't have letters after my name. It's self-indulgent at best. I would expose myself and people in my life and not be forgiven for it. I hear these things all the time. So it's the rare person that can write past those refusals and into the book, knowing that it is coming from a place of service to self and others. If you're using your pen to be poisonous with it and expose others, that's probably not anybody out there who reads memoir in this community who's listening to the Women's Eye podcast. That's not what you're interested in. And Brooke's book really comes from a place of service. So in just a few words, Brooke, and then I got some other questions to ask you. For that person out there that's sitting there going, yes, I want to write a memoir, but fill in the blank with all those refusals. Yep. Can you help give them a little bit of cheerleading here?
I think the biggest thing is not to get too far ahead of yourselves. You know, there's a lot of years and a lot of work between you and the bestseller list, in which everyone knows your private business, right? So just start with the selfish reason why you're doing it. And I say selfish in the most positive way, right? You're doing it to serve your own soul and your own healing. And so write down what makes you the most afraid. Write down that conversation you had that you're afraid of people reading publicly, and then you sit with it. And my strategy was even to anticipate the criticism and write that into the book itself. So it makes it very easy. If you know your subject well and you're the expert on your own story, you know exactly what people are going to say about it. So write it in. And then when you start writing that in, it also makes you self-examine it. And sometimes you say to yourself, yeah, well, maybe I do have a little bit more of a role to play in this particular scenario than I thought I did. And then you write that in, and the next thing you know, you have a story as opposed to a vent. And at the end of it, you've also helped grow and ascend yourself.
Beautiful. I love that answer. I hope that helped people out there who hear those inner critic voices that we all hear, potentially have the permission, give yourself the permission to tell your own story. Okay, so back to the message of this book. This is something that's really important to me. In especially helping people write memoirs. It's sure the entry point might be withdrawal from antidepressants. In my memoir, it was a marital crisis, but usually that's not what the book's really about. So what is the ultimate message of this book? And then I want to ask you some more specific questions, but what is to you, the ultimate message that you would like the reader to walk away with, no matter what's going on in their life?
You know, I think the ultimate message here is is to basically ask yourself, what are you unwilling to feel? And then learn how to feel that. Because so much of our society these days, we're outsourcing our pain, right? We have this inner pain and we want to put it on someone or something else, and we want it to go away. And we think that emotional pain is pathology, or that, a chaotic mind is pathology, and that it somehow needs an intervention, when in reality it is a message. It is telling you something. It is trying to get you closer to who you are and what you were meant to do on this planet. And the further you stray from that, the louder the message gets. And so for me, this book is about taking control. It's about having radical acceptance for the chaos that is the human experience, understanding that I don't know what tomorrow is going to be, and finding a way to be okay with that, because that great adventure is far more fulfilling than, for at least for me, than the years of being drugged out on these drugs since I was a kid ever were. And I hope that people can read it, and whatever choice they choose to make for their own, pharmacological journey, they choose to walk towards the fear, because that's where growth happens. And I hope that the book can help them understand that on the other side of that is really wonderful, beautiful things.
Wow. Isn't she a breath of fresh air, everybody? So I love that you just said that about what you hope the book accomplishes, what you hope it will do for people, because the Women's Eye podcast is all about solutions rather than focusing on the problem. So I love how you're able to bridge from problem to solution to hope. And I also want to say that the Women's Eye podcast is also about transparency. So would you, and feel free to pass, but I want to ask, because I know people are wondering, would you be willing to share how you're doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's funny. I'm a bit of an enigma to a lot of the people around me. I mean, the people who know me close well get it, but to the outside, I mean, it's just, I'm an intense person. I feel things intently, and I show that, and I'm not afraid to show that emotion, whether or not it's in public or it's in private, and it makes people a little uncomfortable. But what I've realized is that, that's who I am. I go up and down. I feel things deep. And I'm sure that you could take that, deep feeling and that empathy, and you could plug it into the DSM and spit out some sort of diagnosis on the other end, but there's nothing wrong with me. I feel things deeply, and I care, and I have lots of interests, and sometimes I'm sleepy and sometimes I'm not. That's okay. And so I'm doing really well. I'm happy. My life is stable. I have family and friends that I love, and I just have no expectations for what comes next. And I'm open to whatever comes. And to me, that's the ultimate freedom. So kind of, what more do you need?
So if you could write a letter or speak to the younger version of yourself throughout all those years, with the wisdom and in the state of being you are in which you are today, what would you say to her?
Oh, it's just such a tricky question, because younger me would have just wanted to punch older me in the face, because there's nothing more than a, young, egotistical teenager, 20 something, who's really, really identifying with whatever label they've been put on. There's nothing that they want to hear less than advice from older people, even if it's yourself. But if I could, kind of go back and maybe make changes to the way things were handled that I think would have affected my development, I think for me, I really needed more time. The context for this is that I was medicated as a teenager after my dad suddenly passed away. So we pathologized grief. And if there's any reminiscent or remnant kind of tentacles on this that I wish I could let go, it's what would have happened if we had just given me time to actually process this. I think there was so much fear that, of feeling too much or something. I don't know. It was weird. I was tossed on these drugs so quickly. It was 2001. And it affected everything. I mean, it affected my relationships. It affected my sexual health. It affected my choice of major in college. It affected the jobs I chose. It affected whether or not I had any motivation to save for the future. I mean, I didn't want a future, so I didn't plan for one. And there was nothing anyone could do at that time to get me out of that mindset, because I had been conditioned since I was 15 to believe that there was something biologically wrong with me and I was not capable of doing better. It still makes me really angry that I spent so long in that headspace, because it's just a huge opportunity cost. And I'm just so grateful that now, it's been 6 years, 7 years, and I think I've really caught up as quickly as I could, but I lost my entire 20s. It breaks my heart. I don't know.
Yeah.
I missed it. And so I just wish that there'd been more grace and more forgiveness and more time.
Thank you for being so honest. I love that you're able to use the words so angry and so grateful so close together. Because, it's not just like pink bow at the end, everything's fine. I mean, there's a grieving here. It sounds like you did lose those years in your own way. Of course, I want to believe that you're wiser for them and the world's better for them because of this book. So I think we've touched on this, but just in closing, I want to talk a little bit about the ultimate reader for this. So in other words, do you have to have had experience with depression and antidepressants to receive this book's ultimate message, which you've described so eloquently? I know the answer is no, but I want to hear you speak to it.
I think that, of course it's no. I've heard from just lovers of literary craft who tell me they just love the way the book is written, and they say, when are you going to write something else? And I just have no answer for them. So just from people who like books and good stories, I know that it's very accessible. But I think even more interesting than that is that even if you personally don't have experience with either antidepressant withdrawal or, the psychiatric system or antidepressants or any of that, you undoubtedly know someone who does, and it's probably someone close to you. So, probably the most interesting conversations I have are with parents of teenagers in this day and age and young kids trying to figure out how to manage this system and whether or not to put their child on medication, because I know what they're hearing from schools and from the doctors, right? But then they come to me and they're saying, this doesn't feel right. I want to talk about it. And so I'm able to talk to them and share my story and give them just another option, another timeline. It's just kind of what I consider informed consent. I mean, we're really not given true informed consent when it comes to our whole mental health system and these drugs. And so for me, the book is really about that, right? It's about just giving the bigger picture of this topic. So whether or not you've had direct experience or know someone, or you just want a great story, I know that people are going to walk away having taken something from it, and perhaps the specifics of that are specific to your scenario or story too. But yeah.
Yes. And as much as she is a teacher and with an incredible message, she is just one heck of a writer. I mean, read the book just because you want to dive into delicious, edgy, honest writing, courageous, fearless. So thank you, Brooke. You can learn more about Brooke Siem and may cause side effects by going to thewomenseye.com. Obviously, you can also go to her website, brookesiem.com, to see what she's up to over there. Over at thewomenseye.com, you'll also find the Woman's Eye books. Again, 20 women change makers. I'm very honored to be in here, and 20 women storytellers. Wait, I think I'm a storyteller. I'm in the storyteller category right down there. There's also the 20 women change makers, and you can buy these books at the Women's Eye or anywhere you buy books, or changemakersbook.com. And of course, I want to thank you again, Brooke, and to all of you for tuning in to the Woman's Eye podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. I'm Laura Munson. Remember, it's the world as we see it.